Hello and welcome to The Take with Sophy Ridge, live at 9 here in the heart of Westminster. Well, Rishi Sunak certainly isn't the first Prime Minister to set a trap for himself in that crucial first speech in Downing Street. But his promise to lead a government of integrity at all levels looks, well, a little tainted by Gavin Williamson's third departure from government, this time over allegations of bullying. And as the opposition and others question the new PM's judgment, there are more than a few on his own side doing the same. So plenty for us to get stuck into as we bring you takes from all sides over the next 60 minutes.
He's a pathetic bully, but he would never get away with it if people like the Prime Minister didn't hand him power.
Well, Keir Starmer wasn't holding back over Gavin Williamson. There was no shortage of glum faces behind the Prime Minister as he accepted that he regretted
I obviously regret appointing someone who has had to resign in these circumstances.
Well, it was another tough PMQs, as you saw there, for Rishi Sunak. Is any honeymoon period now well and truly over? We'll have a look at what Sky News viewers at home think with our regular viewers panel. Good to see you all here today. We'll be talking to you later on the show. We'll also have some top guests, including the new chair of the Treasury Select Committee, Conservative MP Harriett Baldwin. And we'll be talking to Labour Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornberry. Much more besides too on The Take. Now, just before we start tonight, I did want to let you know that we do expect to hear from Joe Biden fairly shortly during the programme. The US President is going to be speaking about the midterm elections in America and the better-than-expected performance by his party, the Democrats. So we'll bring that to you live just as soon as he does start. Back here in the UK, though, Rishi Sunak looked particularly uncomfortable in the House earlier, facing questions over judgment, with Gavin Williamson, who of course played that big role in his leadership campaign, having to resign again. But news of another kind could cause even greater disruption. Hundreds of thousands of NHS nurses have voted for strike action over pay and patient safety. All that as more rumours of potential new tax rises swell just 8 days until, of course, the Chancellor unveils his economic plans. So let's crack straight on. We're going to start with the best bits of the week so far.
The Prime Minister has arrived in Egypt for the climate summit.
I can tell you today that the United Kingdom is delivering on our commitment of £11.6 billion.
Very important to deliver on what we did at Glasgow.
I'm the spirit of Glasgow. That's what I'm doing. I'm the spirit of Glasgow.
We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator.
It's been revealed that Cabinet Office Minister Sir Gavin Williamson is under investigation by the parliamentary watchdog.
Prime Minister's spokesperson today saying that the PM has full confidence in Gavin Williamson.
I actually served in the Whip's office under Gavin Williamson, and there was always this great aura of, do you remember Cronus the spider, the tarantula?
Tonight we've heard from the civil servant who alleges that Sir Gavin told him to slit your throat.
Literally in the past few moments, a tweet has gone out with Gavin Williamson's resignation.
Yeah. Unequivocally, the behaviour complained of was unacceptable, and it is absolutely right. It is absolutely right that the right honourable gentleman has resigned.
The truth is simple. He's a pathetic bully, but he would never get away with it if people like the Prime Minister didn't hand him power.
I obviously regret appointing someone who has had to resign in these circumstances.
The story really has been running and running this week, hasn't it? Now, the chair of the Treasury Select Committee is always a really important job, but particularly right now, you might have noticed the economy is pretty important at the moment, and we'll, of course, be getting the Chancellor's autumn statement in just 8 days' time. But today, Harriett Baldwin was elected as the second woman ever to hold the job. She gave her very first interview to this programme, and I started by asking about her vision for the new role.
Well, of course, being chair of the Treasury Select Committee at a time when economics has really been at the forefront of the national story couldn't be more of a privilege. And I think what the committee will try to do is to be very much scrutinising both the Treasury itself, but also the Bank of England and the regulators, and challenging them without fear or favour.
It's interesting you mentioned the Bank of England there. Do you think they need challenging?
Well, I certainly think they need scrutinising, absolutely, and it's one of the key roles of the committee to do that, and we've got the Bank of England governor coming in quite soon. One of the things that I've been doing on the committee, I've been a member of the committee for the last 3 years, is I've been really quite Cassandra-like in highlighting some of the inflationary risks in the economy once we came out of the pandemic.
And explain Cassandra to people like me who are ignorant.
I know, it's
scholars.
Yeah, no, Cassandra was the one who made lots of warnings and no one listened to her. And I've been asking questions to the governor about inflationary pressures in the economy for a long time. And it's disappointing to see inflation has really got out of its bottle in this country. And we do need the Bank of England to make sure that it gets back inside its bottle.
I mean, you say that you predicted that. Do you think the Bank of England should have been a bit quicker on that as well, then?
Personally, I would have liked to see them move sooner in terms of raising rates from what have been incredibly abnormally low levels. And they were not just keeping rates very low, they were also buying lots of government bonds. And now, of course, they've completely shifted course. They're in an environment where they're raising rates, but they've also started to sell government bonds. And so that gives extra constraints in terms of what the Treasury can do. And I think a completely different environment for all of us as consumers and people who pay mortgages.
You've got your work cut out for you. You're going to have to get out the blocks quite quickly because, of course, we've got the autumn statement later this month. At a time of rising debt, rising inflation, the Chancellor has got to get it right. What do you think Jeremy Hunt needs to do in that autumn statement?
Well, it's going to be such a challenge, isn't it? Because we've had quite a few chancellors this year, and one of them, who's now Prime Minister, tried to raise taxes to pay for the two big items in the budget. They are catching up with the NHS backlog and also all the help that households are getting with their heating bills this winter. And those are really important things to be doing, and it's a question of how do we pay for them. And then, of course, we had the Kwasi Kwarteng approach, which was just to borrow lots, and we could see that there were limits to that. So what Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor has got to do is he's got to tread a very fine line between those two different approaches. So I think what we're hearing is that it'll be a combination of what I call economising and also making sure that the tax revenues are there to pay for some of these very big-ticket items.
It's interesting you talked there about Rishi Sunak when he was Chancellor raising taxes to pay for some of the spending. Do you think he put up taxes too much then?
Well, from a political point of view, you'd have to say that it did cost him votes when the time came for the leadership election. And so I think he'll be very aware of that against the backdrop. And we're all very much hoping that the party has put those contests behind it and that we are all now united. But at the same time, I think it will mean that he feels more cautious about the potential for tax hikes to cause him political difficulties.
Economising or spending cuts also, of course, proves difficult politically as well. Nurses are striking. They say that they want a pay rise 5% above inflation, so that would be 17%. Are you sympathetic to public sector workers who are on strike?
I think the really important thing now is to make sure that, first of all, those who are most vulnerable get help with the cost of living. And, you know, this month alone, £325 is going out to those who are on universal credit. So there's a lot of help also for pensioners. But at the same time, we can't allow inflation to become embedded in people's wage expectations, because then that just becomes an even worse vicious cycle. And what you're seeing, I think, with the recommendation from the arm's length body is something like 4.5% to 5% they've recommended for nurses, I think, off the top of my head. And I believe that nurses are asking for something like 17%. Now, 17% feels like really unaffordable, and also the sort of thing that would cause widespread inflationary pressure across the economy, which hurts the poorest the most. So I do think I would urge all of the unions to look at the full spectrum of support that people are getting for their household budgets and not just focus on that top-line wage demand.
I guess the reason people want their wages to keep up with inflation is because they want to be able to afford things, right?
They want their pay packets
things
after all the deductions and with the help that the government's giving. So, you know, everyone in the country is getting £400, for example, in terms of cut from their electricity bill this winter. Lots of pensioners are getting an extra £300 with their winter fuel payments. And then, of course, taxes themselves and national insurance are going to be lower than they were before, about £330. So I think people have got to look look at everything in the round, because it's actually your net pay, isn't it, after all that support that really helps you with your household budget. And it's not just the top-line wage growth. And we don't want to see inflation get embedded in the UK economy, because that really hurts the poorest the most.
So given that, do you think they're wrong to be on strike?
I would really be disappointed at strike action by nurses. We've got such a problem with the NHS backlog, and I know from my own constituency, Postbag, that we've got to really work flat out to make sure that people have those operations that they need, and that includes some of the less urgent things which I believe are most affected by this strike. So I do think we've got an arm's length body that sets pay, and they've recommended a substantial increase. There's a lot of other help with cost of living, and I would prefer to see our nurses not go on strike.
Now, I do want to ask you about Gavin Williamson, who, of course, resigned from his job in government. There's been a lot of criticism about the way that he has operated. Now, you worked with him, I believe, in the Ministry of Defence.
I did, yes. When I was a Defence Minister, he was promoted to be Defence Secretary, yes.
And then obviously sacked by Theresa May for leaking information. Have you had any run-ins with him? Do you think that his behaviour, I guess, there's been red flags over his behaviour that you've been aware of previously?
I would say he's always been incredibly polite to me personally. I did have to call him up on his first weekend as Defence Secretary to ask him to move the tarantula out of the Ministry of Defence building, and he obliged. So, you know, I've always had a very constructive relationship with him, and, you know, he was very kind and got me promoted as well.
So he brought the tarantula into the Ministry of Defence?
It was briefly there, yes.
OK. Was given the complaint that was against him, was Rishi Sunak wrong to appoint him to his government?
I think with the benefit of hindsight, but as I understand it, the Prime Minister wasn't aware of all of these specific allegations at the time that he made that appointment. And I think today in the Commons he was very clear about that.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So there you go, Cronus, Gavin Williamson's tarantula, not just with him on his desk when he was Chief Whip, but also when he was in the Ministry of Defence. And it sounds like it was Harriett Baldwin, when she was a junior minister there, who managed to finally kick out Cronus. We obviously spoke about those nurses' pay strikes as well, and the concern about pay packets and obviously wages keeping up with inflation. Following that interview, we spoke to Labour's Shadow Attorney General, Emily Thornberry. Let's have a little listen to what she had to say. The Royal College of Nursing has voted to go on strike for the first time in its history. Do you have sympathy with striking workers?
Oh, yeah, I mean, the government just isn't listening to them, doesn't seem to be talking to them. The last time that any Secretary of State spoke to the nurses was 3 or was it 4 Secretaries of State ago. It was Sajid Javid. They're not being listened to, and frankly, what the government should be doing is sitting down at a table with them and talking it through. Any strike is a failure. It's a failure of negotiation. Nobody wants to be on strike. The patients certainly don't want the nurses on strike. The nurses don't want to be on strike. The government ought to be sorting this out. During the whole time when Labour was in power, we never had a strike in the NHS at all. You know, these nurses haven't been on strike since their existence. Something has gone wrong. And frankly, I think that what's gone wrong is we don't have a government that is prepared to be flexible, to think things through and to work with those who we all got outside our doors every Thursday night and applauded.
At the same time, though, you say something's gone wrong.
Yeah.
Some would say the thing that's gone wrong is inflation, right? It's sky high.
Well, it's more than that.
The Royal College of Nurses are saying they want a pay rise that's 5% above inflation. That's 17%. Isn't that a bit too much?
It isn't just inflation, it's also that they are exhausted. You talk to anybody working in the NHS, it doesn't take very long to really appreciate just how exhausted they are, how they have been taken for granted, how they have been worked into the ground, how there aren't enough of them. They can't take any time off sick, they daren't take any time out. We need to the cavalry is coming. We have a plan for introducing many more nurses into the system. So 10,000 more a year that we have a plan for. We're going to double the number of places for people training up to be doctors and increasing the number of health visitors. And just bringing some more people in just to help out will in itself make a huge difference.
Would you grant the 17% pay rise?
I think the truth is that We don't know what the state of the economy is. You know, we couldn't sit down. I can't tell you now.
Does it sound reasonable to you?
What sounds reasonable is that we pay our nurses properly and we give them fair pay and we recognise how important they are. But we also have to do it within the confines of what sort of state the economy is in. Now, you know, so therefore we would need to be able to see the books, we would need to know what the flexibility was, and we would then know what we can negotiate around. But we have a government that isn't even prepared to negotiate. We don't know, for example, what is going to be in the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibilities report on how much mess the economy is in since these Tories have been messing around with it. We don't know how bad things are at the moment, so I can't sit here and tell you.
We have a pretty good idea, don't we, though, about the economic picture, right? We know that there is a black hole. The OBR have told us that. The IFS have done their projections as well. We know the difficulties the economy is facing. In that, would Labour grant a 17% pay rise?
As I say, I'm not in a position, you know, to do this, and I can't write our manifesto sitting here with you, much as I'd like to. You know, and unfortunately, we think there's probably going to be 2 years.
And with apologies to Emily Thornberry, we're going to go straight to the United States, where President Joe Biden is speaking about those midterm election results. Thank you for watching The Take, a bit of a different episode of the programme for us tonight. Lots more coming up, though, at Sky News at 10, where we'll have more news, of course, on those midterm elections, as well as all the latest here in the UK.